How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Ganji. Welcome to another episode of Tear Talk. Guys, Emmanuel Haro's case. How Jake passed parenting classes but still slipped through the system. Now remember, guys, Jake, part of his deal with the judge, if you will, when he committed the crime back in 2018 and was charged in 2023 was to take some level of parenting classes. So what I did was kind of broke down today what is being offered in those parenting classes, how the assessments work. Could Jake have manipulated the system? Maybe the counselor's own bias in wanting to be successful could have affected this. So I broke this dialogue down into 5 sections with one big question for us all to answer at the end. Now, guys, if you're not familiar with the Emmanuel Haro case, this is Jake Haro, and right now he is currently charged for the murder of his son, Emmanuel Haro, and it's him and his wife that are both being charged. But the big thing here is he was charged for child cruelty back in 2023 for what he did to his daughter, Promise Faith, in 2018. And people are wondering, how could a monster like this, an experienced child abuser, be left to have other children, not being watched when they have those children? So they believe there's a lot of flaws in the system. So today what I wanted to discuss real quick is how counseling programs work, how they're completed, how can inmates manipulate that if need be, or sometimes the own bias of the counselor to connect to a success. So there's a lot here. I got some notes here, so you're going to have to bear with me. But basically, did that one. Let's start first with the counseling and program completion. So remember, with counseling and program, there's going to be class participation, one-on-one, homework assignments, reflection journals. So I want to break all this down. So after Jake Haro first child cruelty conviction, the court required him to complete parenting child abuse counseling programs. Okay, so these programs typically involve, so we got classroom style sessions. So that, classroom style sessions on parenting strategies, discipline alternatives, and child development. So what does this involve? Group learning sessions focused on teaching effective parenting techniques, nonviolent discipline methods, and age-appropriate child development knowledge. So why is this important? Because it fills the gaps, right? So many offenders lack basic knowledge about child development and appropriate expectations for children at different ages. And it also builds skill. It provides concrete alternatives to harmful behaviors, giving parents tools to handle challenging situations without resorting to abuse. Remember, a lot of these individuals, they are impulsive, and their first behavior, their first instinct, their first reaction usually is something that could be violent. So this is to give them other strategies so they can help mitigate that impulse. Then there's in the group setting, in the class setting, there's peer learning. So group settings allow participants to learn from others' experiences and normalize healthy parenting approaches. And then it's a prevention focus. Understanding child development helps prevent unrealistic expectations that often lead to abusive responses. But now remember, this is a group setting, so the counselor really still has to deal with these individuals one-on-one. So you got to have one-on-one sessions, because as I see you guys all in a class, but I really got to know who these individuals are. So you are going to have one-on-one sessions. So that's individual therapy sessions addressing personal history, triggers, emotional regulations, and behavioral patterns. This way, yes, we get the catch-all with the group, but now I'm starting to get stuff with that individual as well. So why is that important? Because you're going to address the root cause. So it allows exploration of underlying issues that contribute to abusive behavior, like trauma, history of trauma, mental health, substance abuse. So you're going to attack the root. So why are you violent? Let's talk about that. And then you're going to help the person work through that so they can see that this isn't the way. But again, you got to go through their history. You got to dive deep. And the person you're working with has to be honest with that history, has to be honest in how that history could affect them. But mind you, it's not as an excuse, because it's not meant to give you something to blame when you do act out, but rather, how do we work through it? Because it's not an excuse. Because at the end of the day, that child did nothing to you, and you're just kind of continuing that legacy of harm onto another innocent child. So when does it stop? So again, you get the personalized treatment, tailors intervention to individuals, risk factors and circumstances, And then you get the safe disclosure space, because again, this may be hard to talk about in an open area with a bunch of people. So this is good for one-on-one, and it's good to have that trust built. So it provides confidential environment for discussing sensitive personal history and current struggles. And then there's the therapeutic relationship. It builds trust and accountability through consistent professional relationships. Remember, the counselor has to build that trust with that inmate, because that inmate is going to have to admit to things, or that person, is going to have to admit to things that they never told anybody before. And a big part of it is also admitting that they were wrong. So again, same strategies you would see on the outside. So now we also have homework and journaling. And this is to demonstrate reflection on past behavior. So what is involved? Written assignments requiring participants to analyze their actions, identify triggers, and practice new coping strategies. So I'd love to see, I don't know if that would ever be released, but his homework assignments. Why is it important? Self-awareness development forces introspection about harmful patterns and their impact on children. So now you're getting the person to write how they feel about what they have done. And this is good, because a good counselor is going to look for remorse, guilt. But with that said, it can't be surface. It's got to be felt. So sometimes that the homework assignment would be good to follow up with a one-on-one session. Hey, you spoke about this. Let's dive deep into what you wrote here, because I need to know if this is surface, you're playing a game, or kind of just saying what I want to, what you think I want you to say, or can we go a little bit deeper here? I would really like to know, is this something you really feel, or is this something you're just going to go through the motions so you can pass and be done with it? So again, it forces introspection about harmful patterns and their impact on children. Cognitive restructuring helps challenge distorted thinking patterns that justify or minimize abuse. So you got to see where the excuses are. Well, I beat my child because I was beating. That's an excuse. It's not a justification. That's an excuse. Don't minimize what you've done by pushing blame. And again, a lot of the counselors, they try to get the person to step into some level of ownership, because in the end, if the person's still blaming and not taking ownership, I think that's a red flag, because blaming is a way to give them an excuse. Point the finger at someone else. Even point the finger at the child, sadly. Skill practice provides opportunity to practice new techniques in real-world situations, and progress documentation creates concrete evidence of engagement with treatment concepts. That is what must be extremely important, because this is a documented effort that we spoke to the person one-on-one, and these are the things that we discussed based on what was revealed to us through their homework, through their self-reflection, and we really got to the individual. So this wasn't just doing a checklist. I mean, we went and talked to the individual, and these were certain things that they wrote about that we addressed, that we felt was important to address specifically for that individual, their journey. And emotional processing. Writing helps process guilt, shame, and responsibility in structured ways. And then you got the progress reports that track attendance, participation, and insight. Now, track attendance and participation, that's excellent. You do need that, but the insight to me also matters. Like, why are we doing this? A lot of people may jump on this because they know they need it, not because they need it personally, but because I need it to get to the next step. I need to get out of here. I need to get rid of this probation. This is what probation's requiring. This is what parole's requiring. So I need to get on that program. Yeah, but you haven't told me once why you need it based on what you've done, the ownership of what you've done. So again, attendance and participation, it's needed. I need the person to be present, but the insight, and then being able to dive deep into that insight, gives you the why behind why they're, attending. And that's where you look for the ownership. So again, what involves regular assessment by program staff, document and compliance, engagement level, and demonstration of treatment concepts. Now, why is it important? Well, one, it's an accountability mechanism. So it ensures participants actively engage rather than simply attending passively. It's a risk assessment tool, which we'll get to again, but helps professionals evaluate genuine change versus superficial compliance. I just said that. Genuine change over superficial compliance. That's why we need our experts in that, in counseling, to understand, like, hey, this guy, something's not right. I'm not connecting to it. He's definitely going through the motions, definitely checking the boxes, but I don't know. There's just no connection for me. So you really need to kind of go beyond the surface, dig deep, because the person could just be selling you a bridge because they are motivated to complete it for these reasons, but they're not inspired. They're motivated because at the end of the day, it's something that they have to do to move forward with their life. Then you got the court reporting, so provides objective information for legal decision-making about supervision and custody. So all this stuff will be given to the courts, and the courts can make a decision. Yeah, they can go on and have unsupervised visits with their children. We believe they truly changed, or no, there's some red flags here that need to be addressed. And at this point, this is what we're going to do. But I would assume the judges, this is kind of an exchange of liability, technically, because you definitely don't want a counselor just going through the moments. They participated, they were there, so they checked all the boxes. And then the judge, when they make the decision, they lean on the paperwork from the counselor. Hey, you said they were okay, so I made the decision. So now you got this blame going back and forth, because even when the judge makes the decision, the judge is making the decision ultimately on what's being provided to him. So it's kind of like he has that layer of protection. So if he does make a wrong decision, he could always go back and say, hey, this is what the counselor gave us after the risk assessment was done. Treatment adjustment allows programs to modify approach based on individual progress and needs. So that's in real time. And graduation criteria establishes measurable standards for successful program completion. Now, Jake, his completion results, Jake's reportedly completed the requirements and was given positive marks for attendance, cooperation, and presentation of lessons learned. Okay, but it needs to be more. I mean, I get it. Attendance, cooperation is great, but anybody could do that. Presentation of lessons learned. So basically, he just has to reiterate what was being taught, but to feel the lesson. I don't see that there. So if somebody knows more, let me know. But anybody could attend. I just got to wake up and go. Anybody could cooperate. I'll just raise my hand a few times, answer a few questions, go through the moments. And lessons learned, sure, I read the book. I'll do a quick little something on it. And this is what I learned from reading, kind of sell the bridge. But does that mean I feel it? And that's where really the one-on-one counseling should be able to bring out. I mean, a real good counselor should be able to deep dive in that individual and, really try to understand what that individual is about. But I don't know if that was the case here. So then you have the critical analysis of successful completion. So while Jake received positive evaluations, this raises important questions about program effectiveness. So you have surface versus deep change. So positive marks for presentation of lessons learned may indicate he could articulate concepts without truly internalizing them. That's kind of what I said. Compliance versus transformation. Good attendance and cooperation demonstrates rule following, but don't necessarily indicate genuine behavioral change. And assessment limitations. Programs often rely heavily on self-reporting and observable compliance rather than deeper psychological change. And the recidivism risks, the fact that Jake later faced additional charges suggests that intervention may not have addressed core issues effectively. And obviously, we see that now with Emmanuel. This highlights ongoing challenges in child abuse intervention programs, distinguishing between genuine rehabilitation and sophisticated compliance designed to satisfy court requirements. Listen to that. Distinguishing between genuine rehabilitation and sophisticated compliance designed to satisfy court requirements. And the person that's supposed to know that difference as best as they can is that counselor. Before they pass that to the judge, the counselor's got to ask, is this genuine or is this some sophisticated manipulation? Now, I want to talk about the risk assessment process because this is extremely important, because this should be done after the completion. The person's completed, but let's get a little bit more of a deep dive, because the completion really is the superficial part. So following program completion, evaluators conducted a risk assessment. These studies include, so let me get here, the assessment components, and they're important. Structured interviews with the offender. So what it involves: systematic questioning using validated interview protocols to gather information about criminal history, personal circumstances, attitudes, and future plans. So they're going to be going deep with what he did to promise faith, or they should be going to deep, because they got to, does this guy feel remorse about this? Guy feel guilt? How did this happen? What caused it? What was the baby's behavior? How did you feel about what the baby was doing? Maybe the baby was crying. The baby couldn't stop crying, so he reacted impulsively. I mean, we got to understand what caused that reaction. Why is it important? And remember, they got to take ownership to that. So standardized data collection ensures all evaluators ask similar questions, reducing inconsistency between assessments. Direct information gathering allows evaluators to hear the offender's own account of events, motivations, and current mindset. Because again, you're addressing what their specific issue is. And you really have to go to that client or to that person who is in need of counseling. Clinical observation provides opportunity to observe demeanor, emotional responses, and consistency in storytelling. So that's another thing. I mean, sometimes these people that push blame, man, they'll go from one blame to the other, to the other, to the other. I couldn't take a breather. The only one that's overseeing this child, so I couldn't breathe. I needed a second to breathe, so you beat up the child. You got to weed out every excuse until you get them to take ownership. And a lot of them, that's hard for them to face. So they're going to go up to blame after blame after blame because that's all they know. So you got to keep on, as a counselor, you got to keep battling that and layer after layer after layer until you finally get to that spot where the person says it was me. So there's obstacles there, who they're going to go to blame, what they're used to blaming, the system, their drug use, all these things that they've learned to become excuses for their negative behavior. And a good counselor is going to attack everyone specifically. And then they're going to get that person to where there's nothing left, but where's the ownership? Now we need the ownership. Risk factor identification. So it systematically explores known predictors of recidivism. So criminal thinking patterns, minimization, blame, externalization. So external blame, as we talked about. And treatment readiness assessment evaluates motivations for change and insight into problematic behaviors. Now, what's the limitations here? So you have a self-report bias. So that relies heavily on offenders' honesty and self-awareness. Then you have the impression management. Sophisticated offenders may manipulate their presentation, which we talked about, because they know how the counselor wants them to be seen. So these guys are experts at creating that image, going through the process where it makes it look like the image was created through the program. So now they may even give credit to the counselor. Hey, you really changed me. And they really connect themselves to that counselor. So the counselor sees their success through them. So now the counselor is like, oh, this is great. I'm doing really good by this one person, because they're feeding into that counselor's purpose. And then when something happens, the counselor could truly be shocked. Well, they told me this. Because they sold you a bridge and you bought into it. It's very complicated. It is. That's why counselors should be able to definitely know a lot about manipulative behavior, because in the end, the inmates don't only play them, they pull them into their narrative and make the counselor a hero, give them a purpose. And then the counselor gets so connected to that purpose that they're not seeing that this person's got no depth to them. They're just playing into the needs of the counselor or the wants of the counselor. And interview skills variation. Quality depends heavily on evaluators' training and experience. So there's a standardized questionnaire. So that scales measuring risk of future abuse, what it involves, validated assessment tools that score various risk factors, including history of violence, substance abuse, stress factors, and support systems. So it is an evidence-based approach. It uses research-validated factors that statistically predict recidivism. It's an objective scoring, so it reduces subjective bias through standardized scoring criteria. Comprehensive coverage, it ensures all major risk domains are systematically evaluated. And then there's a comparison standard, allows comparison to normative samples and established risk thresholds, and then documentation, which is key. It provides clear, defensible rationale for risk determinations. And a lot of people do lean on those risk assessments. Okay, I know they completed the program, but could I get the scoring on that risk assessment? Where do they fall in compared to normal individuals? And then the common risk factors that are assessed are static factors, so criminal history, age at first offense, numbers of prior victims, so things that don't change, like this is what we know about the individual. And then you have the dynamic factors, current substance use, employment stability, relationship quality, mental health status, so things that could be a catalyst to some extent on top of those other rooted factors. And then protective factors, social support, treatment engagement, stable housing. So where do we have the balance? And I think that matters too. If you have someone that has a history of substance abuse and you believe that could be the cause of what they do, then when they go back to the environment, what can help be a protective factor that can minimize that substance abuse, that can minimize his ability to go ahead and do this again? So that's where some of this work has to affect the family that's around them, because sometimes a family will continue to provide excuses. They become enablers. I know in a lot of cases where there's a sex offense, sometimes you have family members that admitted that they've done something after they've been told on by, let's say, the loved one that was being affected by their abuse, and then the family turns against the one that was being affected by the abuse. Oh, that person divided the family. They could have just told us. No, that person was violated. And the person that did it deserves to go through the criminal justice system. So again, it's interesting how we can enable things without realizing it. So again, good good counseling doesn't just affect the individual, it affects anything that can enable that behavior. And then it helps provide protective factors so it can minimize those behaviors from happening again. Because most of the time when they decide, hey, this person should be good to go, they're also going to highlight protective factors, because when they go, they got a family that's going to be there that is going to help them through the process. And right now, we're really relying on the family. We spoke to them. The family doesn't have this negative history, doesn't seem to enable them. And I think in Jake's case, I don't think there was much support there, and they just sent them out. So I got, like, one of the tools that they use is CARE, which is Child Abuse Risk Evaluation. If you guys are interested, you can look that up. Another one is CRAT, Child Risk Assessment Tool, so CRAT, and that's various domestic violence risk assessments adapted for child abuse. All right, now what are we doing? Observation of engagement in session. So what it involves: clinical assessment of the offender's participation style, emotional responses, and apparent genuineness during treatment and evaluation. So why is it important? Well, the authenticity assessment matters because it helps distinguish genuine remorse from performative behavior, which we discussed. The treatment response evaluation indicates how well the person internalized treatment concepts. That's key. And that's something that's way beyond surface. A good counselor is going to be able to see, did my lesson resonate with you, or you're just selling me a bridge? Emotional regulation observation shows ability to manage stress and frustration in a structured setting. Insight demonstration reveals depth of understanding about impact of actions on victims. So this is what you are doing, and this is how you're making the victim feel. I mean, we have great courses that I know of called Focus on the Victims, where we bring in people who have been through crimes, and they let the population know this is how that crimes make them feel. And it's some of that can be very powerful for these individuals who may have done something situationally, not so much because they're bad people, but they got caught up in the situation, and then there's remorse and guilt. And then now this kind of helps them, guides them through it. Like, this is how you made that person feel. This is what your crime has done to all those that have been affected. Because most of the time, these people are just selfish gain. But once you kick in how it makes someone else feel, some of them do turn around, especially those that weren't really motivated by some evil doing, just rather they got caught up in a situation and they went too far. Again, some people you'll just never be able to change. Doesn't mean you don't try. Of course, you continue to try, but you also know it's hitting a brick wall. And then there's the motivation assessment, indicates whether change efforts are internally or externally motivated. And I said I kind of use motivation versus inspiration. That's what I'm used to, but you're right. Is this person being motivated to change? If so, what's motivating them? Is it the fact that they need it to get out? Or is this person inspired to change? Now, that's the person I want to get to. And then the key observational elements is remorse quality, genuine guilt about harm caused versus self-pity about consequences. That's powerful, right? Let's say that again. Genuine guilt about harm caused versus self-pity about consequences. And then you have the responsibility acceptance, full acknowledgement versus minimization of blame shifting. I always say blame because that's the big thing that I see. Emotional appropriateness, suitable emotional response to discussion of harmful behaviors. And that's kind of where you have good counselors that can see that. There's no feeling here. Yeah, you're saying it, but I'm not feeling it. It's not resonating with me. So at this point here, I'm not buying it. We got to go a little bit deeper. An engagement level, active participation versus passive compliance. And then you have there's the collateral check, what it involves: gathering information from third parties such as family members, supervisors, teachers, or other professionals who interact with the offender. So there's a lot that goes here with these risk assessments. And we talked about that. These will be either the protective factors or the enablers. Why is it important? External perspective provides view of behavior outside controlled assessment environment, because I'm only doing this here very controlled. But let's talk to the families. Let's talk to the neighbors. Let's see who this person really is when they have a bit more freedom. Reality testing verifies or contradicts offenders' self-reported changes in circumstances. So that's great, because now you keep in contact with the family and make sure what they're telling you or what the person you're counseling is telling you is the truth. So it's good to kind of validate what's being said. So that's why those follow-ups matter, from like Child Protective Services, all that, because at the end of the day, if I'm just seeing him, that doesn't really mean much. I got to see everybody that's around him, because then you start to get a different story. And then you have to now figure out, who's telling you the truth, who isn't. But you need people to kind of balance what his story is. Is that truthful? I don't know. Why? Because I haven't validated. I only talked to him. I need to now go to the house. So this is all things that, the follow-up visits should also assist in doing. Pattern recognition may reveal concerning behaviors not evident in formal setting. Support system assessment evaluates quality and stability of social support and the environmental factors. Identify situational stressors or protective elements, as we talked about. The enablers, what protects, if you have good social support, or maybe there's stuff in the house that maybe it is a bit stressful. Maybe the person now has a few kids and it's just too much for them to handle, and you kind of see it as a counselor. You should be able to recognize that and then maybe kind of do more follow-ups if needed. I just think in Jake's case, after seeing what happened to Promise Faith, for me, I would just put the liability. This person can never have a child again, because I would not be able to risk that happening to another child. So sorry, man, you lost your right on parenting at that point. And who's going to go against that? Because at the point is, we'll go back to court, we'll challenge it, and then someone else would have to go ahead and put their name behind your freedom to have another child, or minimal, another child unsupervised. I wouldn't put my name on that, because I have to live with what would happen next, which would be what happened to Emmanuel. Information sources. So you're going to go to your family members. So current behavior, stress levels, interaction with children, employee, supervisor. So again, the family's the closest. So we'll get an understanding of that, but they may have their reasons to protect them to some extent. So we're going to go, outside the direct family. We're going to go to employer supervisors, because they can notice certain behaviors may not be directly related to parenting, but related to handle stress. So they could talk maybe about, hey, this is he had a problem with one of the customers, and this is what he did, and all that matters. Well, how does what happened in the workplace matter home? Because it shows you how he manages stress, work performance, reliability, interpersonal functioning. So whatever his job was, you talk to the employer, hey, how's he doing when he goes under stress, when he's got a lot of work, or when someone doesn't agree with, how does he react? Because that can play out at home. Treatment providers, progress in ongoing therapy or support groups, and then community contacts, neighbors, religious leaders, volunteer coordinators. And then for Jake assessment, his result was, in Jake's case, the conclusion was that he posed a low risk of further abuse, and that determination played a key role in allowing him continued parental access. And again, I'd have to assume right now that he was just performing with everyone. If they did all this, he was just an expert performer. But when he was with the child, he didn't have to perform. When he was with Rebecca, he didn't have to perform, because he became comfortable. And when he becomes comfortable, the mask comes off. So that explains why they would see someone different. But it also explains why Rebecca would also try to protect him, because she will probably think that when the mask comes off, that's not who he really is, when technically that is who he really is. So if she got caught up in this, and again, I'm not minimizing what she's done, but because she could be just as evil as he is, but I like to provide all all perspectives, is that she may get confused with the mask. No matter how much he plays the bad person, she got a glimpse of who he initially was when they first met. And it was probably something performative. So she clings on to the performative side and believes that's his real side. And then eventually, every time it slips off, he may justify all this, and that's not really me, blah, blah, blah. And she may lean on to that initial impression. A lot of people that are a little bit stronger don't always trust that initial impression. They question it. So they wait for something to be revealed. And when something gets revealed, they usually lean on what the stress of the situation reveals, because that's how you truly know who someone is, right? You know who they are through how they react to the stress of the situation. But at that point, her forgiveness, whatever it is, let's say she kept on forgiving him, also made her compliant, because she probably failed to report a bunch of stuff that he did, which made her connected to what he was doing, and also eventually gave him leverage. If that's what comes out, and we'll find out, because I believe I believe they're going to break her, and then eventually they're going to use her as a main witness against Jake. But we'll see where that goes. All right. And then I have critical analysis of the low risk determination. I wanted to break that down a little bit. So factors that may have contributed to low risk rating. So you do got the program completion. So that's successful completion of mandated treatment. Then you got the compliance history, good attendance and cooperation during supervision. Then you got presentation skills, ability to articulate treatment concepts and express appropriate remorse. Again, could still be performative, could still be surface. Stable circumstances, possible employment, housing, or relationship stability, because they do look at that. How stable is this person's life? And then the first-time offense, lower statistical risk for first-time versus repeat offenders. So this could have been his known first time with Promise Faith that we know of. And then the potential assessment limitations in Jake's case. You got the base rate challenge. Child abuse has relatively low base rates, making prediction difficult. Assessment tools may have high false negative rates, and the low risk doesn't mean no risk. Again, it's still a low risk. Imagine if I decided, hey, I need to have my daughter or my daughter's babysit by this person, and they only present a low risk of hurting my child. Yeah, you're not getting my child. The scale of low risk, high risk still presents itself as a risk. I want the no risk. Dynamic risk factors. Risk can, and it's funny because they say low risk because that's a covered answer, ain't it? Because I didn't say there wasn't any. I just said there was a low risk. No, come on, guys, make a decision. I still don't think low risk to high risk is a decision. I think there should be a no risk in there and start backing up, your evidence. Because again, low risk. Hey guys, it is a low risk. I'm sorry, but okay. Well, that means there is a potential that they can hurt someone else. So at that point, if it's a low risk and you can't determine it to be a no risk, then I got to treat the low risk as if it's a high risk. Sad to say, but again, that's something I think that will have to be looked at. Like, how do you determine a low risk is enough for the person to gamble on? Potential assessment limitations in JK. We talked about, so let's see. So dynamic risk factors. Risk can change rapidly based on life circumstances. So that's kind of where it gets a bit difficult to make that decision. Stress, relationship changes, or substance use can elevate risk quickly. And assessment represents a snapshot in time, not permanent status. That's why when you have the low risk, you got to have those frequent visits, because maybe there are certain things in the situation that can change, that can cause that person to fall back to what they're comfortable with. So again, if you have people that are classified as low risk, you really still got to keep checking on them, because at any moment, a situation can happen that can make them a high risk. Assessment gaming. So sophisticated offenders learn to provide correct answers. We talked about that. That's the performative side. May demonstrate surface learning without deep change, and impression management skills can mask ongoing risk. That's why our counselors have to be experts at manipulation. They have to understand the game, not to play the game, but to understand the game and how it can be played against them. Professional optimism biased. Evaluators may be influenced by treatment completion success, desire to believe intervention worked as intended, and pressure to support family reunification goals. Because sometimes you may know the person's a bad parent, but man, I don't want to take the parent away from the child. So let's just try to look at it from this angle. And I think sometimes that's where we get blinded by emotion, because who doesn't want a child to be with their parent? But sometimes the parent is the problem. And then limited predictive validity. So current risk assessment tools have moderate accuracy at best, many true positives. Future offenders score as low risk, and assessment science continues to evolve. Going back with the low risk again, they're low risk without the pressure. Once you get that pressure back in, they could just jump right into high risk again. So the systematic implications, the fact that Jake later faced additional charges despite his low risk rating, highlights critical challenges in child protection risk assessment. So there's a false sense of security, as I talked about. Low risk ratings may create unwarranted confidence in safety. Resource allocation may lead to reduced supervision when continued monitoring was needed, because again, it's low risk, but situational factors matter. So you still got to treat a low risk as at any moment it could become a high risk. Didn't say no risk. Then there's the legal weight. Courts heavily rely on these assessments for custody and access decisions, because that's, hey, this is what the counselor told me. So now the exchange of liability now goes, the judge is able to put it back on the counselor when they make a decision like that. And professional accountability raises questions about assessment quality and evaluator training. So this case illustrates why risk assessment should be viewed as one tool among many, requiring ongoing monitoring and reassessment rather than a one-time determination of safety. All right, let's go to parental manipulation by Jake, because we have to be aware that he could have manipulated everything from the classes to the one-on-one homework assignments, where he's supposed to reflect and have insight. Risk assessment. They can learn the system so well that they know what the expected answers are. So could Jake have manipulated the process? Absolutely. All right. So So let me show you some manipulation tactics and their significance. So we got charm and presentation. Offenders can say the right things and rehearse responses that counselors want to hear. Talked about that. So what does this involve? Learning treatment terminology and using it appropriately in conversations. Expressing emotions that evaluators expect to see, like remorse, shame, commitment to change. Shame is a tough one to get. But yes, they are supposed to be able to see that, but expert manipulators know how to perform. Demonstrating insight by connecting past behaviors to treatment concepts. So again, if we're having that one-on-one and, we start talking about some of the concerns that cause you, some of your root concerns, like the static ones, like your child's history, your history as being abused, maybe drug abuse, whatever, things that may not change, then you may know how to utilize that, or the inmate, or the person in need of help may know how to manipulate that and know that, hey, if I'm going to get through this, I got to really get deep. So I'll just start talking about my drug abuse and how it's not good and how it causes me to do this. So I'll take ownership of that. And then they know how to play into what the counselor is looking for. So again, that's demonstrating insight by connecting past behavior treatment concepts and presenting as especially motivated and eager to continued self-improvement. So why is this so effective? Well, professional vulnerability. Counselors and evaluators want to believe their interventions work, making them susceptible to convincing presentations. That's why I tell people that are counselors, remember, you work for the facility, not the inmate themselves, because sometimes they get so caught up in wanting to save the individual where it's not our job to save them. It's our job to guide them, but not save them. If you start thinking you have to save them, then you wind up getting overly involved. And sometimes people say, well, I just can't save the individual. Sometimes there's individuals you can't save, but you got to be careful because they could play that. And then you wind up doing more than you're supposed to. And that's what pulls you into this undue relationship. And then you start making decisions based on emotion and not really based on proper training. So the training paradox is treatment programs inadvertently teach offenders exactly what responses are considered appropriate or insightful. So that's like the catch-22. You're teaching them to be a better manipulator to some extent. That's why counselors, think about how complicated this could be. You're teaching them to be able to be a better manipulator, but you have to teach them because there's a chance that there's the only things that are going to connect if the person really wants to make that change. So now look how manipulative they can be. The stuff that you teach them is the stuff that they utilize against you. And then there's the time constraint. Evaluators often have limited time with each case, relying heavily on verbal presentations during sessions. So we had to put that in there. And cognitive bias, the halo effect, means that articulate, cooperative participants are often viewed more favorably across all measures. So the smarter they look, the more they claim they understand the lessons, the more we start to buy in, put the halo on them. So what are the red flags that might indicate manipulation? So responses that seem overly polished or rehearsed, use of treatment language without genuine emotional connection. We talked about there's no depth, and a counselor should be able to feel that. Ability to give textbook answers, so it's just memorized. So that's the ability to give textbook answers without personal struggle or growth process. So it's very no depth, as I said, no feeling to it, just giving the answers because that's what I read. Inconsistency between verbal insight and actual behavioral patterns. And then you have the compliance versus change. Attending every session and completing worksheets looks good on paper, but doesn't always mean there's internal change. So what compliance without change looks like. And I mentioned this before, genuine change versus just being compliant. So perfect attendance records while engaging minimally in actual session content. Completed homework assignments that reflect expected answers rather than genuine reflection. Following all rules and requirements while maintaining underlying attitudes. And cooperative behavior that ends immediately when formal oversight is reduced. So that's important, right? When you're no longer present as the counselor, then you start to find who that person really is, but you're not going to be there to see it. That's where you go out to the community, talk to the families, and who is this person really? Because I don't know. I only know what they show me. And that's what some counselors have to remember, please. You only know what they show you. Because sometimes they get caught up in trying to justify that. Well, I know him, or I know her. I don't. Do you? Do you? That 1 hour a day you're spending with, how much do you really know somebody? I could perform for an hour. So I think that's important to know. Why this disconnect is dangerous. So surface level metrics. Programs often measure success through observable behavior. So attendance, assignment completions rather than internal transformation. Then there's the gaming potential. Intelligent offenders quickly recognize that compliance equals positive evaluations. Then there's the assessment limitations. Difficult to measure genuine attitude change versus performance of change. And then there's the system pressure. Staff and programs face pressure to show effectiveness through completion and compliance rate. So it's not about progress. It's really not, because some people may need longer than others, but it's rather how many of you completed. That's what's important. How many are waiting? How many have attended? How many are completed? Somewhere along the line, it's like, everybody could be fixed in a 6 to 8 week programming session, follows this curriculum. And no, some people may need more, but all they care about sometimes is the completion. How many have you completed? And then they also, for numbers, is how many are waiting versus how many spots you have. That also usually matters with metrics to make sure we're offering what we should be offering. So now you have the deeper issue. And we talked about this, external versus internal motivation. So this is motivation versus inspiration. So true change requires internal motivation or inspiration. But compliance can be driven entirely by external consequences. Hey, if I don't do this, I'm not going to get my normal life. I can get locked back up again. I got to do this. That's not the right motivation. That's conditional. Temporary suppression. Remember, change is not conditional. Temporary suppression. Problematic thoughts and impulses may be suppressed rather than actually addressed. And then the cognitive dissonance. Offenders may compartmentalize compliant behavior from their true beliefs and intentions. And they're experts at doing this. Trust and believe. They could play the whole motions and not really resonate with any of it, but just go through the emotions because they know that's what's needed and they know that's what the counselor wants to see. So blame shifting. Offenders may downplay responsibility. I was stressed. It was just one mistake, while still technically acknowledging fault. Real quick about blame shifting. So sometimes people find it healthy to blame external conditions because then it's not permanent. So usually people that suffer through depression internalize a lot of things and feel they're hopeless in an effort to change. But when it comes to actually changing the individual, you do need professionals to do this, because you got to force the person to look inwards. You're not looking for something external because that's conditional. You're looking for something inside them that has to change. So you're pushing for the internal change. So they do have to recognize they're the ones at fault. They're the ones that own this, and they're the ones that have to find change from within. And not try to blame it on a situation, because at the end of the day, it wasn't the situation, it was how you reacted to it. That's the problem. So common blame shifter charges, I want to put this in there. So circumstantial excuses, I was overwhelmed at work and I just lost control. Isolation narrative, this was completely out of character, one terrible moment. And I think sometimes they sell that if the person truly only knows their performative side. But eventually, one terrible moment becomes multiple terrible moments. So the pattern should start to outweigh who you think that person really is. External stressors. If I had more support at home, this never would have happened. Bullshit. Victim behavior, subtly suggesting your child's actions contribute to the incident. The child wouldn't stop crying. So you beat the shit out of the child because the child wouldn't stop crying? Children are expected to cry. Your reaction is still wrong. It's not going to work. I mean, I know it all gets to a step away, do something, but do not put your hands on that child. That's the only way the child can express itself. And mental health deflection, using legitimate issues, depression, anxiety to minimize personal responsibilities. That happens a lot. Why this is particularly insidious? Because this technical compliance appears to meet program requirements for accepting responsibility. And trust and believe, strong counselors know when they're trying to use external blame, shift accountability, because they will push for ownership. Cognitive distortion, preservation. So core thinking patterns that enable abuse remain intact. Future risk maintenance keeps the mental framework that could justify future harmful behavior. And then professional deception may satisfy evaluators' checkboxes without genuine accountability. And we talked about that, right? We're just going through them. No, we're not. Is this genuine? How do you know it's genuine? Well, I checked all the boxes. They were present. How do you know? What do they say to you? What do you feel when they're talking to you? I want to know what you feel. Counselors are very good with tactical empathy. So they could recognize feelings, and a lot of good ones trust in those feelings. And if something doesn't feel right, they need to act on that. The psychological significance. So you got the victim mentality. So now you have the person that is the aggressor playing the victim. Maintains view of self as victim of circumstances rather than agent of harm. Minimize. So reduces the severity of actions through contextual explanation. Oh, I know I beat the child, but the child wouldn't stop crying. Or, I know I lashed at a customer, but he was just getting on my nerves. They were baiting me. And then the externalization places causation outside of personal control and decision making. That is what I think matters. That their behaviors are not in their control, that they were pushed into it. And there's their blame. And it's like, not enough. The behaviors were in your control. You choose how you react. That is your choice. Short-term behavior adjustment. Same offenders behave well during supervision, but revert back once oversight lessens. What this pattern looks like. So you got the dramatic behavioral improvement that coincides exactly with legal consequences. Again, they're only doing it because they want to be able to, live their life, pass probation, or whatever it is that's required to have that level of freedom. Exemplary conduct during supervised periods with deterioration once monitoring decreases. We talked about that. So again, it's performative. It's only when mommy and daddy's watching, only when the counselor or the child protective service team is watching. Resentment or complaints about oversight requirements despite outward compliance, and statements suggesting supervision is unnecessary or that they've learned their lesson. Nah, that's funny, because I'm sure that happens because they may find that the supervision is a bit intrusive. Nope, you've earned it. Why this occurs. So you have the surveillance effect. So behavior modification driven by awareness of being watched rather than genuine change. So they're only doing good because they know they're being watched. Consequence avoidance. Primary motivation is avoiding punishment rather than preventing harm. So again, not for the right reasons. They just don't want to be punished. So it's external, conditional. Temporary suppression. Problematic impulses are controlled rather than eliminated. See, how powerful is that? It's temporary suppression, right? I'm going to control it because I know I'm being watched, but it's still there. So the more I control it, the more I have to push down. Eventually, it's going to explode, right? So now imagine, the moment you leave, this person gets frustrated and they just lash out almost immediately because they've been pushing it down for so long. All performative. Strategic planning may be consciously waiting for supervision to end before returning to previous patterns. And again, guys, got to visit because these things are not discovered through a one-on-one session or visits every once in a blue moon. These are patterns you're looking for. So the underlying psychology. So there's no value shift. Core beliefs about children, discipline, or personal rights remain unchanged, even though the counselor may believe it's changed. No, it hasn't. The person still has a belief in what they did technically is right because they can blame the situation. Think about how powerful that is. If I can blame the situation, then any normal person would act this way. So maybe I am right. Sadly, this person got harmed by me, but hey, I'm not at fault. So if I'm not at fault, what else are you saying? Are you saying you're right in what you did? Because that's the only thing I can interpret. What's the opposite of you saying you're not at fault? Conditional morality. Good behavior is contingent on external monitoring rather than internal values. What am I going to watch this person for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week? No. So now once I leave, who is this person really? That's why I think you got to have, if you'll notice this at the very beginning, when people get released, they're being checked on a lot because they're trying to basically build some momentum in the right direction. Because if you go every once a month, whatever it is, that you don't create enough momentum. So sometimes the supervision there, the presence starts creating momentum. And then hopefully that momentum builds in the right direction. But when you're not there, when you're not constant, the momentum has a better chance of setting in the other direction. Let's see. Where am I? Because conditional morality, good behavior is contingent on external. We did that. And then resentment building may actually increase anger and justification for future harmful behaviors. So Jake's strategic system gaming. Jake may have recognized the checklist nature of these programs and played into it, appearing rehabilitated while harboring the same tendencies. And how could Jake have exploited system weaknesses? So again, got the assessment gaming. So research risk assessment criteria and tailored responses to lower his risk score. Learned which behaviors and statements evaluators find most convincing. Practice expressing remorse and insight in ways that satisfy professional expectations. And study successful program completion strategies from other participants or online resources. Professional relationship management. So again, this is for the counselor and let's say in this case, Jake, but you want to build a positive rapport with counselors. So this would be for Jake. I'm sorry, Jake towards a counselor. Built positive rapport with counselors and evaluators to become a success story. Volunteered for additional activities to demonstrate exceptional commitment. This is in playing the system, guys. Use treatment staff as character references for court proceedings. Look at that. You don't think the defense will try to pull that person up? Hey, you put this person as a low risk. Let's talk about it. And I'm sure the prosecutor would like to rip that apart. and then presented as especially coachable and responsive to intervention. So again, Jake's playing the system. And then the narrative construction, crafted a compelling transformation story that fit program expectations, emphasized external stressors while maintaining just enough responsibility to seem accountable. So now there's a balance of blame versus ownership. And I'm telling you, good counselors, they don't want any hint of blame. Nope. Ownership. And they will minimize that blame. They don't want it. They don't want to hear it. They don't want that even brought up. They will cut that person off from saying it. Highlighted positive life changes as evidence to rehabilitation, which we talked about. That's the static stuff. And framed the original offense as an aberration rather than part of a pattern. So basically, they're not that person. And then you got the professional optimism bias, which I wanted to bring into light. And we'll go into a little bit more of that too, because sometimes the counselors only want to see what they want to happen. So evaluators' investment in believing their interventions are effective, desire to see positive outcomes after significant program investment, because they're invested too. They don't want to look like they wasted their time. Pressure to demonstrate program success through participant achievement. But then you got the limitations of the assessment tool. Heavy reliance on self-reporting rather than objective behavioral measures, which we talked about. Limited ability to detect sophisticated deception or impression management. We talked about that. And focus on static historical factors versus dynamic psychological processes. How they process what happens in real time also matters. So again, that's the stressors. That's what can automatically push the person into falling back into what they're used to doing. So you have to take that into account. So yes, the person has changed. I get it, but we still have to know, can they react better to these situations, these stressors? And that's why you got to keep on top of them. So then we talked about the resource constraints. So limited time for in-depth evaluation of each participant. Counselors may not have the time to do all that, caseloads, whatnot. Large caseloads preventing thorough investigation of inconsistencies and pressure to move cases through the system efficiently. And then what you have is the broader implication. Jake's potential manipulation highlights critical flaws in child protection systems. So you got the false security, right? You got the low risk determinations may create unwarranted confidence in child safety. Again, I don't want low risk. I want no risk. Resource misallocations, reduced supervision when continued monitoring might be essential. Then you have legal consequences. Court rely heavily on these assessments for custody and access decisions. And again, that's also for liability. If judge makes a bad decision, they can lean on what was said by the professional counselor. And the professional accountability raises questions about the adequacy of current assessment methods. So this analysis suggests that Jake's subsequent charges may not represent assessment failure, but rather successful manipulation of systems designed to detect change rather than sophisticated deception. It underscores the need for more robust manipulation-resistant evaluation approaches in child protection. I want to do one more thing, guys. Sorry, guys, but there's a lot here. I want to explore again a little bit of the counselor's role in bias, and then I have a question for you guys to answer. So there's one more part that we're going to revisit real quick, a little bit more in depth. And another factor is the mindset of the counselor or program facilitator. This matters because if I'm the manipulator and I know this person's going to buy in, I'm going to play that. And why are they going to buy in? Because they want me to be a success. They clearly keep saying it. So I'm going to be that success. So there's professional bias and their impact. So success tied to outcomes. We talked about that. So counselors sometimes feel their credibility is linked to whether their clients graduate successfully. That can bias their evaluation. So remember, guys, we're not in charge of change. We're not in charge of outcome. We're only in charge of our effort. And I wish more people would understand that. Most people believe that their work only comes through outcomes. So they push for outcomes that may not be able to get, but they'll keep on pushing. And then they believe it, even when it's not there, because that's where their success is, as opposed to, hey, guys, I'm trying. Well, do. No, the world looks at things the wrong way. Effort is what we control. Effort and attitude. You know, I'll have the right attitude so I can commit to the right effort, but do not put me in a situation where I feel that I have to control the outcome, because that's not up to me. That's up to the individual. And then what happens is if something goes wrong, I'm the bad guy because you put me in charge of an outcome that I cannot produce. But with that said, I think sometimes that push for outcome, because you do have a very outcome-driven system, yes or no, well, that could force people to say, you know what, I got to put the yes down. You know, where some people are more conservative and say, no, I'm still going to put the no. Professional bias and their impact. Success tied to outcomes. So as I said, counselors sometimes feel their credibility is linked to whether their clients graduate successfully. That can bias their evaluations. What does this involve? Program effectiveness measured by completion rates and positive outcomes. So that could explain why he got that score of low risk. Professional reputation dependent on client success stories. To be honest, as I think about this dialogue, it makes sense why they put low risk, obviously, because obviously you can't control the outcome. But to be honest with you, low risk is still a risk. I just don't think that's a good enough answer, especially if someone like Jake could be considered a low risk because they can manipulate the system. I think it's a safe answer. So then for the person that has to make the decision, it's a low risk. How do I make that decision then? Because the person still presents a risk. I think it's very self-preservation to some level, right? Because I could put low risk, and no matter which way the outcome goes, we're protected from liability. But then the person that has to make the decision, let's say the judge, they got to make a determination, but yet they're the ones that are least involved with that individual. They're not having the day-to-day contact with the individual, so I need an answer. But sometimes people put these answers that are just safe, and maybe that was the safest answer, and that's just, I think, unacceptable. It's crazy how, liability always has to get pushed up. I get it, but maybe people should start making answers or start, giving something that we can really lean on as opposed to writing an answer that best protects you before passing it up. That's not the case. We're supposed to do whatever we can to protect the next level up. So we should be given answers that we truly believe in and not answers that we could fall back on and change. So again, program effectiveness measured by completion rates and positive outcomes, professional reputation dependent on client success stories, career advancement tied to demonstrated program effectiveness, and funding and job security connected to showing positive results. And that's what people want to hear. People believe that positive results equate to success, and that's going to bias the system. Positive results are not up to us. It's up to them. So we have to start being honest with what we're shown, because again, not everybody you can save. So if that's the case, admit it. I think sometimes people get so invested where you have to change that person. I'm not in charge of their change. I can help them through it, but they're the ones. So if I can't do something, it's not because of me. The system didn't fail. They failed. Why does this create dangerous bias? Because you have motivation, conflict, counselors, professionals. Interest may conflict with objective risk assessments. Selective attention may focus more on positive changes while minimizing concerning behaviors. Lowered standards, graduation criteria may be unconsciously relaxed to improve success rates, and confirmation bias, tendency to interpret ambiguous behaviors as evidence of positive change. And then you got the professional pressure sources. So the agency expectations. Organizations need to justify funding through successful outcomes as opposed to the effort. Career advancement. Positive client outcomes often factor into performance evaluations. Peer recognition. Professional status enhanced by reputation as effective with difficult cases. So think about that. That's a strong external motivator to see things the way you want to see it. And personal satisfaction. Natural desire to feel effective and helpful in challenging work. How does this manifest in practice? Giving clients benefit of the doubt in borderline situations. Focus in evaluation reports on progress rather than remaining concerns. Reluctance to recommend program failure or extended treatment. And then overweighing compliance behaviors versus deeper psychological change. So again, the overemphasis on compliance, we talked about that, but we have to revisit it one more time. Attendance and polite behavior may overshadow deeper warning signs. So you have lack of empathy and minimizing abuse. So what compliance focused assessment looks like: perfect attendance records given significant weight in evaluations, polite, respectful behavior during sessions viewed as major positive indicators, completion of assignments prioritized over quality of reflection in those assignments. So you're buying into what they're telling you. And then rule following behavior assumed to indicate genuine attitude change. And what are the warning signs that may be overlooked? So you have lack of empathy, so inability to genuinely connect with victims' experience and suffering, minimizing abuse, continued subtle downplaying of the severity of impact of harmful actions, superficial remorse, appropriate expressions of guilt without deep emotional processing. We talked about that. Cognitive distortions, persistent thinking patterns that justify or rationalize harmful behavior, victim blaming, subtle suggestions that victims contributed or deserved abuse, and grandiosity, underlying sense of superiority or special treatment expectations. And why compliance gets overweighed? Because they're measurable metrics. Talked about that. Attendance and behavior are easy to quantify and document. Immediate feedback. Compliance provides instant positive reinforcement for both client and counselor. Professional comfort. Working with compliant clients is more pleasant and less stressful. And time constraints. Easier to assess surface behaviors than deep psychological processes. And again, that could be the pressure of time. So think about that. I don't have time to dig in deep. This is what he said. I can write down this is what he said and then lean on that. Again, it's comfortable enough for me to say he said this, and liability wise, I can lean on that. I don't have to. What about if I keep on asking why and it gets a little bit more complex? No, I'll just take what he said as a surface level, because a lot of it could be just leaning on stuff because it's easier to defend later on when someone could just maybe say you should ask some more questions, because in the context of who he is, that statement conflicts with everything he is or has done. And then you have the assessment blind spot. We talked about that. So surface versus depth. Compliance measures external behavior, while true change requires internal transformation. Then you have the manipulation advantage, gives sophisticated offenders clear roadmaps for appearing rehabilitated. And the false equivalency assumes that behavioral compliance equals attitude changes and reduced risk. So you have the optimism bias. Many in the helping profession want to believe people can change, which can cloud judgment when dealing with manipulative or high-risk offenders. What optimist bias looks like in practice: assumption that treatment participation indicates genuine motivation for change. That's why I like to use the word inspiration. Belief that everyone has capacity for rehabilitation with right intervention. Hopes that client positive statements reflect authentic internal transformation, and faith that therapeutic relationships will inspire genuine behavioral change. Why helping professionals are vulnerable? It's their professional calling. That's where their purpose is. So many enter fields because they believe in human potential for growth. They have training emphasis. Education focuses on therapeutic optimism and client empowerment. So when they're trained, they believe in the good of their work. So they're very optimistic, and they believe in empowering the client to make their change. So that's a good thing, but not to the point where you're buying everything that they're selling. Success stories. Positive cases reinforce belief in treatment effectiveness. And cognitive dissonance. Difficulty accepting that some clients may be irredeemably dangerous. And how this bias manifests: selective evidence, focusing on any signs of progress while minimizing concerning behaviors. Therapeutic optimism, believing that continued treatment will eventually produce breakthroughs. Benefit of doubt, consistently interpreting ambiguous behaviors in most positive light. And denial of manipulation, resistance to acknowledging that clients may be deceiving them. And the professional vulnerability, you have emotional investment, right? We're invested in this together. We're taking the journey together. I do want you to be successful, but I want you to be successful so bad that I even see it when you're not showing it. I refuse to believe it. So developing hope for clients that clouds objective assessment. Then you have the identity threat, accepting client manipulation challenges professional competence. Cognitive bias, natural human tendency to see what we want or expect to see. And then you have the systematic reinforcement, professional culture that rewards optimism and client advocacy. Now, this creates a dangerous dynamic. A motivated offender plus a counselor eager to show program success equals false sense of rehabilitation. And how the perfect storm develops: the motivated offender contributes. So strategic intelligence recognizes counselors' professional vulnerabilities and motivations. Impression management presents as ideal client who validates counselor's effectiveness. A little tight up, let me look good for this. Let me speak good. Let me give them what they want. Emotional manipulation provides counselors with a sense of professional accomplishment. And then the narrative collaboration helps create success stories that benefit both parties. And then what's the counselor's contribution? Professional investment becomes personally invested in clients' apparent success. The bias confirmation interprets clients' behaviors through lens of desired outcomes. Standard lowering unconsciously reduces criteria for successful completion. That's powerful. So not only do they interpret clients' behavior through lens of desired outcomes, they unconsciously could reduce criteria for successful completion. Because again, they see what they want to see. So they can lower the standards just to get the person to pass, so they can minimize certain things that could be red flags. Well, it's not that serious. Well, it could be, but no, it's not that serious. Let's just move on to the next thing. And then the warning of minimization, which overlooks or rationalizes concerning behaviors. So here's the systematic fault. False rehabilitation markers, program completion certificates that don't reflect genuine change. So again, that's something I can show. Hey, I completed this. What does that really mean? What does that really mean? What do you mean you completed it? Positive progress reports based on surface level improvement. Risk assessment skewed by counselor optimism and client manipulation, and court recommendations that prioritize apparent compliance over actual risk. And then the child safety implications: children return to or maintained in potentially dangerous situations, reduced supervision based on false confidence and offender rehabilitation, legal system decisions based on professionally validated but inaccurate assessments, and community safety compromised by premature restoration of trust. And then how do you break this dynamic? Professional safeguards needed. So you need outcome independence. So separating counselor treatment roles from evaluation assessment functions. Bias training, education about common cognitive biases and clinical assessment. Hey, going back to the outcome independence, that's more about effort. I can't control the outcome, but there's the effort there. So recognizing the effort more than the success of the client. Bias training, education about common cognitive biases and clinical assessment, objective metrics, developing manipulation-resistant measures of genuine change, peer review, multiple professional perspectives on high-risk cases, and long-term monitoring, extended follow-up periods to verify sustained change. And the structural change request, role separation, different professionals for treatment versus risk assessment, accountability systems, regular audit of outcomes and decision-making processes. So basically, let's have people from the outside look at this and not people from the inside and see, what are we doing here? And let's look at these numbers. And does that really mean we're successful? Or because we have all these completions, maybe success is more in the effort. The effort in noting, because believe it or not, a successful outcome is also noting that the person is not ready to be around children. That's still a successful outcome. That's a good outcome to have, because now we know in advance that we can't put this person next to a child. Training enhancement, focus on recognizing and resisting manipulation tactics and cultural shift, balancing therapeutic optimism with child protection realisms. What's the bottom line? Jake's case illustrates how well-intentioned professionals can become unwitting accomplices in dangerous deception. The combination of professional bias, system pressures, and sophisticated manipulation creates conditions where apparent rehabilitation masks continued risk, ultimately endangering the very children these systems are designed to protect. This dynamic suggests that protecting children requires not just better assessment tools, but fundamental changes in how we structure and evaluate child protection interventions to minimize the influence of bias and manipulation on critical safety decisions. And that's the key. We broke down how this is done, but we also mentioned two things: the manipulation process of an inmate who knows how to manipulate, highly performative, and then the want for someone to change that's held by the counselor that could bias how they view things. So I want to ask this question to every one of you guys and see how you guys answer this. Is the Emmanuel Haro case exposes a systematic flaw? And so now, can short-term counseling and paper-based risk assessment truly measure long-term safety, or do they sometimes create a dangerous illusion of progress, making it easier for abusers like Jake to avoid scrutiny? And that is the question. All this we talked about, we're going to try to answer. And even as we had this discussion, I was developing my thoughts along the way. So I'm learning in the process as well. So everything I'm providing you is not perfect, because it's not, because you could always look at it and say, well, maybe I conflicted a little bit, but for the most part, I think I kept it straight and narrow. But I love your thoughts. And again, we're learning on this together. I thought this was a good topic to discuss, and I'd love to know what you think. Be safe, everyone.